Black Lives Matter. Trump spits the words across the chamber, mocking Jasmine Crockett and every fight for justice she represents. In America today, over 63% of black citizens believe the system is rigged against them. And yet, here stands the 47th President of the United States, daring to turn that pain into a punchline. Jasmine Crockett doesn't flinch. She knows more than 400 federal complaints have already been filed against Trump's administration. She knows millions of voices outside these walls demand the truth. This is not just a hearing. It's a battlefield where arrogance collides with courage, where Donald Trump believes insults can bury the truth, and Jasmine Crockett is ready to prove him wrong. The first shot has been fired, and the fight is about to explode. Trump leaned forward across the polished oak desk, his eyes burning with that familiar cocktail of arrogance and mockery. "Pathetic little fool," he spat, his words echoing like venom through the chamber. A collective gasp tore through the audience. Some jaws dropped in disbelief, others smirked in quiet approval. Cameras flashed, catching the curl of Trump's lips as if he'd already won. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She pressed her palms against the table, her posture tall, unyielding. The silence she held was louder than his insult. Trump chuckled darkly, mistaking her composure for defeat. "See that? No words. That's what happens when a child wanders into a ring meant for warriors." The crowd murmured, the weight of his derision spilling across the room like a toxic fog. Finally, Jasmine broke the silence. Her voice rang out crisp and steady, each word sharpened by conviction. "Mr. President, it doesn't take strength to mock. It takes courage to tell the truth. And courage is the one thing you've never carried with you into this room." Her words sliced through the air. The murmurs swelled into a wave, the chamber rippling with tension. Trump's smirk cracked. He slammed his hand against the desk, the sound booming like a gunshot. "Don't you dare lecture me. I've built this country stronger than ever. You've built nothing. You just scream about justice because you've never held real power." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her head tilting ever so slightly. "You confuse greed for power. You confuse fear for leadership. And the only thing you've truly built, Mr. President, is a legacy of division." A sharp gasp rose from the chamber. A few dared to clap before the gavel pounded furiously for order. Trump's face reddened, words spilling faster, sharper. "Division? I united millions. I controlled the media, the courts, the very walls of this government. You, Crockett, you're just a noise nobody listens to." Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Noise, Mr. President, is what topples walls. Noise is what wakes nations. And right now, the noise you fear most is the truth standing in front of you." Sacre. The tension thickened, pressing against every chest in the room. The reporters scribbled with furious hands, cameras zooming close to catch the fire in Jasmine's eyes, the fury etched across Trump's face. "You'll regret this," Trump snapped, jabbing a finger at her. "You'll crawl out of here broken. This is my house, Crockett. Mine." But Jasmine leaned in, her voice dropping low, almost intimate, every word deliberate. "This house doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people. And today, the people deserve to see you stripped of the lies you've worn like armor." The chamber trembled with energy, the words detonating like explosives. For the first time, Trump faltered, a twitch in his jaw, a flicker of hesitation. The man who thrived on dominance and derision had just been pushed back, and Jasmine did not miss her moment. "History won't remember the titles you've given yourself. It won't remember the wealth you wave like a flag. It will remember this, when a man tried to bury justice under insults, and justice refused to bow." The audience erupted. Cheers, boos, fists pounding against desks, chaos flooding every corner of the room. But Jasmine remained still, her stare locked onto Trump's, her presence radiating defiance. The gavel banged again and again, desperate to restore order. It didn't matter. The war had begun, and no gavel in the world could silence it now. Millions watching from their living rooms leaned closer to their screens. They weren't just witnessing a hearing, they were watching a battlefield ignite. And as the sparks turned to flame, one truth was clear. This fight had only just begun. If moments like these move you, if you want to follow every word, every clash, every crack in the armor of power, Then join us. Subscribe now and stand in the front row of this battle for truth. The applause, the boos, the chaos of the chamber hadn't yet settled when Trump struck again. His voice boomed, dripping with scorn. You don't belong here, Crockett. You're nothing but a loudmouth, a street-level nobody who lucked her way into this room. The words cut sharp, designed to wound, to belittle. Gasps erupted again, louder this time, the audience torn between outrage and grim satisfaction. Trump leaned back, savoring every second of the uproar he'd caused. Jasmine's expression didn't waver. She had expected this. This was his strategy. Turn insults into shackles, chain her with humiliation before she could speak. But her silence wasn't submission. It was coiling strength. When she spoke, her voice carried a calm ferocity that sliced through the noise. Mr. President, every word you just spoke reveals more about your fear than about me. The chamber hushed instantly. Jasmine's gaze locked on his, unblinking, unshaken. You diminish me because you cannot diminish the truth. You mock where I come from because you are terrified of where this nation is going. Trump slammed his palm against the desk. I'm terrified of nothing, he barked, his face crimson. You're a second-rate agitator. You're here to play victim because you've got nothing else to offer. Don't think for a second you're my equal. Jasmine's lips curved in the faintest smile. There it is, she said softly, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. That arrogance, that desperation. Every insult you throw is proof that you are shaken. Because if I truly were nothing, Mr. President, you wouldn't waste your breath trying to bury me under words. The chamber erupted, shouts of approval clashing with angry jeers. The gavel hammered down again, but the storm only swelled. Trump leaned forward, jabbing a finger toward her. You're weak. You're incompetent. You don't deserve this platform. You don't deserve this country. The venom in his words rippled outward, thickening the air. For a moment, even the walls of the chamber seemed to strain under the weight of his fury. Jasmine did not blink. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. Mr. President, when a leader feels secure, he doesn't need to crush others to stand tall. Only a frightened man lashes out this way. And today, the entire world can see how afraid you are. The words detonated. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed so close you could see the bead of sweat forming at Trump's temple. The chamber boiled over. Cheers exploding from one side, furious objections from the other. One senator leapt to his feet, shouting for decorum. Another bellowed in defense of the president. The gavel pounded like a war drum, but it did little to contain the frenzy. Trump's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched. You dare call me afraid? Me? I've faced down world leaders, dictators, armies. Jasmine cut in, her voice rising with a sharp, unrelenting edge. And yet you tremble when a woman with no army, no wealth, no power, but her voice stands before you. That's the fear history will remember. The chamber gasped. It was a dagger straight to the core of his pride. Trump roared over the noise. Sit down, Crockett. You're a disgrace, a fraud, Enough, shouted one of the committee chairs, slamming his own gavel so hard the sound cracked like thunder. This chamber will come to order. But order was nowhere to be found. The room pulsed with energy, with fury, with something raw and uncontrollable. Members of Congress huddled, whispering urgently, trying to weigh whether to intervene further. Security shifted uneasily at the edges, their hands twitching, waiting for the signal. Through it all, Jasmine remained upright, poised, her stare fixed on Trump. She had turned his fire back on him, made his fury into evidence, his insults into testimony. The audience could feel it. The balance of the room was tilting. Trump's rage, once his greatest weapon, was starting to look like weakness. Jasmine's voice, steady and commanding, filled the chamber again. Every time you lower yourself to insult me, you raise the case against you. The people watching know it. The world knows it. And soon, Mr. President, even those who cling to your lies will have no choice but to see the truth. The words hung in the air, heavy as iron. No one dared to breathe. For the first time, the mighty chamber seemed to belong not to the president, but to Jasmine Crockett, warrior, challenger, the voice he could not silence. And outside those walls, millions of viewers leaned forward, hearts pounding, knowing this battle was only tightening, the fuse burning faster toward the inevitable explosion. Trump saw the tension and seized it like a showman grasping the spotlight. He slammed a stack of papers onto the desk with a dramatic thud that reverberated through the chamber. "Here it is," he barked, lifting the pages high for the cameras. "Proof, solid proof that Jasmine Crockett is nothing but a fraud, a puppet, a liar in a cheap suit pretending to care about justice." He waved the documents like a weapon. "These are reports, real reports, showing how you've twisted facts, misled communities, lined your pockets while pretending to fight for them. Every word you've ever spoken here is a sham, and today the world sees it." The audience gasped, murmurs rippling through the room. The cameras zoomed in, hungry for every letter on the page, though none were close enough to read. Trump wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his grin venomous, his voice sharpened to a blade. "Do you hear that, Crockett? That's the sound of your career crumbling. I'm bearing you under the weight of your own hypocrisy." He paused for effect, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "You call yourself a warrior for justice? Please, you're a clown, a pathetic little actress playing to the cameras. And guess what? The show ends tonight." The words dripped with contempt, each insult hammered in like a nail. He chuckled, shaking the papers again, as though they were a judge's gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold the truth, the fraud unmasked." The chamber vibrated with noise. Shocked whispers, outraged shouts, gleeful smirks. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like fire. Senators leaned toward one another, whispering in urgent tones. And Jasmine remained perfectly still. Her silence was not weakness. It was a pause carved in stone, deliberate and unnerving. She did not reach for the papers. She did not argue. She simply sat, her eyes fixed on Trump, her face unreadable, every second stretching like an eternity. The silence thickened. What was meant to humiliate her was turning into something else entirely. The longer she waited, the heavier the air became, the more Trump's confidence seemed forced. He sneered, trying to fill the void. "Nothing to say, Crockett? That's what I thought. You can't fight facts. You can't argue with reality. You're exposed, finished, done." But his voice rose too quickly, a shade too loud. His laughter rang hollow, brittle around the edges. Jasmine still didn't move. Her silence pressed against him like an invisible hand, choking the swagger out of his words. One senator leaned to another, whispering, "She's not falling for it. She's letting him sink himself." Trump banged the stack of papers down again, desperate to command the room. "Look at her! Quiet as a mouse. Pathetic. This is your so-called warrior? This is your savior? She can't even open her mouth to defend herself." He barked out a laugh, but it cracked halfway through, jagged and raw. The cameras caught it. The audience noticed. Still, Jasmine sat in silence, her stare unwavering, her composure a fortress. And with every heartbeat, the chamber shifted. What had begun as Trump's triumphant display now felt like a man screaming into a void, trying to convince himself that the walls weren't closing in. Finally, Jasmine inhaled. The sound was soft but powerful, like the calm before a storm. She placed her hand gently on the microphone, and still, she did not speak. The silence stretched further, unbearable now, pressing down on the audience, pressing down on Trump himself. Reporters leaned forward, their pens frozen midair. Viewers across the country sat rigid, waiting for the inevitable eruption. Trump, sweating now, tried again. "You see? This is your hero? This is the voice of justice? A coward hiding behind silence?" But the chamber didn't laugh with him. The chamber didn't cheer. The chamber waited. For her. And when Jasmine finally opened her mouth, her voice was quiet, measured, each word sharp as a blade drawn slow from its sheath. "Thank you, Mr. President." The room froze. Her eyes glimmered with something deeper than anger, deeper than pride. "You've just given me exactly what I needed. Every insult, every false paper, every desperate word. It all reveals the truth, louder than I ever could." Trump's grin faltered, his fingers twitching against the desk. Jasmine leaned closer, her tone unwavering, her silence transformed into a storm now breaking free. You're not showing the world who I am. You're showing them who you are. A man terrified of a voice you cannot silence. The chamber erupted again, the gavel hammering like thunder. But this time, the chaos was not his weapon. It was hers. And outside those walls, millions of viewers leaned forward even further, breathless, knowing they were witnessing not just a fight, but the slow cracking of a fortress once thought unbreakable. Then Jasmine moved. Her hand slipped beneath the stack of folders resting at her side. Calmly, deliberately, she pulled out a thick manila envelope, sealed and marked with the insignia of the Oversight Committee. The crowd hushed. Even the clicking of cameras paused for a heartbeat. She laid the folder on the desk, fingers brushing across its surface. Her voice was quiet, but the silence around her made every syllable thunder. You want evidence, Mr. President? Let's talk about evidence. She opened the folder and withdrew a stack of documents. Real documents, stamped and signed, official memos that carry the weight of law. These, she said, lifting them high, are classified communications and financial records from your own administration. Documents that detail misused funds, secret deals, and cover-ups buried under your command. Gasps spread like wildfire. Reporters nearly tripped over themselves, leaning forward, pens scratching, cameras flashing so bright it felt like lightning had struck the chamber. Trump's eyes widened for a moment, just a flicker, but he recovered fast, leaning forward, his mouth curling into that familiar sneer. Fake news, he bellowed, his voice cracking through the air. Fabricated garbage. Lies cooked up by bitter losers like you. The roar echoed, feeding his side of the chamber. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in razor-sharp amusement. Fake news? She repeated, her voice ringing with mockery. Funny, Mr. President, how you cry fake every time the truth cuts too close. You sound less like a leader and more like a broken record, scratched, stuck, and completely out of tune. The chamber erupted, half in laughter, half in outrage. Some pounded their desks in approval, others shouted in fury, the gavel hammering desperately for order. Trump's face darkened, his knuckles white against the desk as he slammed his fist. You dare! But Jasmine cut across him, her voice surging with momentum, her words sharp as blades. Dare? Yes, I dare. I dare to show this nation what you've hidden. I dare to put in front of the American people the receipts of your corruption. While you shout, I reveal. While you insult, I expose. She fanned the documents across the desk like a dealer laying down a royal flush. Pages of numbers, signatures, correspondence glared under the chamber lights. The weight of truth lay bare for everyone to see. Trump rose halfway from his chair, his voice breaking into a scream. Lies, every word! Lies written by liars to trick fools. Don't you see she's staging a circus? But his fury only fueled her calm. Jasmine's voice lowered, steady, cutting through his roar like a scalpel through flesh. No, Mr. President, this isn't a circus. This is a reckoning. The chamber shook with the force of her words. Reporters typed furiously, phones buzzed with breaking headlines. Outside, millions of viewers leaned closer, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Trump jabbed a finger across the table, spittle flying as he shouted, You're a disgrace! A liar! Nothing but noise! Jasmine leaned forward, her tone dripping with mockery, each syllable slow and deliberate. Then why, Mr. President, is the noise of truth shaking your throne? The explosion in the chamber was deafening, cheers clashing with boos, the sound of history bending under the weight of the moment. The gavel pounded, but it was useless. The chamber had transformed into a battlefield, the air heavy with heat, the walls trembling with the roar of clashing voices. Trump shouted again, Fake! All fake! His words rang desperate now, his fury fraying at the edges. Jasmine straightened, her eyes blazing, her voice rising above the storm. Every time you scream fake, you confess your fear. Because truth doesn't tremble, Mr. President. You do. The words landed like artillery fire. Trump froze, his mouth hanging open for a split second too long. And that silence, his silence, was louder than any insult he'd ever thrown. The The chamber knew it. The cameras captured it. The people watching at home felt it in their bones. In that instant, the battlefield belonged to Jasmine Crockett. And though the war was far from over, the tide had shifted. The fortress of arrogance had been struck with a blow of undeniable truth. The heat in the chamber was unbearable now, every breath thick, every shout a cannon blast. The hearing had become a war zone, and no one, not even Donald Trump, could pretend otherwise. But Trump was not a man to retreat. If evidence threatened to corner him, he would change the battlefield. If facts wounded him, he would reach for something more venomous. He leaned back in his chair, his grin widening into something colder, more sinister. "You want to play games with me, Jasmine? Fine, let's talk about you. Let's talk about the skeletons in your own closet." The chamber stirred uneasily. Whispers ricocheted off the marble walls. Reporters raised their heads, pens ready, sensing another headline in the making. Trump's voice grew louder, his words slow and deliberate, like daggers drawn one by one. "You call yourself a warrior of justice, but I've read your record. I know your mistakes, your failures. That law firm you left behind, the scandals, the whispers of misconduct, people who said you were ruthless, reckless, someone who would burn everything down just to stand in the spotlight." Gasps echoed through the room. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine, waiting for a flinch, a crack, any sign of weakness. But she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her stillness was sharper than any outburst could have been. Trump pressed harder, sensing blood where there was none. "And your personal life," he sneered, his tone dripping with malice. "Failed relationships, debt, struggles you've hidden behind that polished mask. Tell me, Jasmine, how can someone who can't even control her own life lecture anyone about truth or justice?" The room fell into a tense, breathless silence. The attack was brutal, personal, raw. It was designed to break her, to strip her armor and leave her exposed before the nation. But Jasmine only smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't weak. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. She leaned forward, her voice soft but carrying like a bell. "Thank you, Mr. President, for reminding everyone that when the truth scares you, you crawl into the gutter." Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Trump's smirk faltered. Jasmine rose to her feet, her tone sharpening into steel. "Yes, I have scars. Yes, I have lived through failure, through struggle, through heartbreak. But those scars are not shame. They are proof I survived, proof I rose, proof I am stronger than the mud you try to throw." She paused, her eyes cutting into him like fire through ice. "You, on the other hand, hide from your scars. You bury your mistakes under lies. You paint over your failures with gold, and you pretend you've never bled. That is not strength, Mr. President. That is fear. Fear of being seen for what you are." The chamber roared, half in applause, half in outrage. Some shouted "order," while others cheered her defiance. The gavel hammered furiously, but no one was listening. Trump slammed his hand on the table, his face crimson, his words spilling in a torrent. "You're a fraud, a hypocrite. You think you're untouchable, but you're nothing but a puppet for radicals who want to destroy this country." Jasmine fired back instantly, her voice cutting like thunder. "And you, Mr. President, are nothing but a monument to arrogance, hollow inside, propped up by fear, desperate for applause to drown out the truth." It was no longer a debate, it was cannon fire. Each word hurled like a shell, each retort an explosion that shook the walls. Trump bared his teeth, his insults spilling faster, harsher, uglier. "Radical, corrupt, traitor," Jasmine countered, each time twisting his venom into his own noose. "If fighting corruption makes me radical, I'll wear it proudly. If standing here terrifies you, then I must be doing something right. If telling the truth is treason, then history will judge me kindly and condemn you." The audience was on its feet now, some screaming, some clapping, some waving their hands for silence that would never come. The chamber no longer resembled a hearing. It was a battlefield of words, fire meeting fire, fury against fury. Trump leaned forward, his voice breaking into a snarl. "I will crush you. I will break you in front of the whole world." Jasmine didn't miss a beat. You can't crush what refuses to bow. You can't break what refuses to kneel. Her words landed like thunderclaps, shaking even the marble columns that stood watch over the chaos. The hearing had become more than oversight. It was a duel for the soul of the nation, and neither warrior showed any sign of retreat. Trump's fury burned hotter, Jasmine's defiance blazed brighter. Word against word, fire against fire, and outside millions of viewers clung to their screens, breathless, knowing they weren't just watching politics. They were watching a war of wills, a battle where the human spirit itself was on trial. And just when the chamber seemed locked in a one-on-one duel, other voices surged into the fight. A senator from Trump's party leapt to his feet, red-faced, his voice cracking with rage. Enough of this charade. This woman has disrespected the President of the United States long enough. She's nothing but a loudmouth chasing headlines. Another joined in, jabbing a finger across the room. She twists facts, she spreads lies. She should be ashamed to even stand in this chamber. The floodgates burst open. One after another, Trump's allies rose, their insults volleyed in unison, trying to drown Jasmine beneath their chorus of scorn. Disgrace! Fraud! Danger to the Republic! The chamber shook with their fury, their words clashing and colliding, a wall of noise meant to smother her voice. For a moment it seemed like a coordinated ambush, an avalanche of power meant to bury her alive. But Jasmine stood still. She let them howl. She let them spit their venom until the air reeked of bile. And then, when the noise reached its peak, she raised a single hand. The room hesitated, if only for a breath. Her voice sliced through the cacophony like a blade through silk. Finished? She asked, her tone calm, almost amused. Good. Now let's talk about shame. The chamber snapped back to silence. Every eye swung toward her. She turned to the first senator, her gaze steady, her words dripping with precision. You accuse me of chasing headlines? Sir, the only headlines you've made in the last decade are about the donors who bought your votes. If integrity were for sale, you'd be out of stock. Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the audience. The senator flushed crimson, fumbling for words he couldn't find. Jasmine pivoted, locking eyes with the second attacker. You say I twist facts? You who couldn't survive a debate without a script written by your handlers? Tell me, do you even remember what the truth sounds like? Or has it been too long since you last spoke it? The senator opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Jasmine's words had cut deeper than any blade. The chamber stirred again, this time louder, sharper. The murmurs were no longer just whispers of shock. They carried something new. Approval. Trump scowled, pounding the table. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned toward a third ally, who was already rising to hurl another insult. Ah, she said, raising her hand to halt him. You want to call me a disgrace? Let me remind you, disgrace is a man who takes oaths with one hand and breaks them with the other. Disgrace is serving the people with your lips while serving yourself with your hands. The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Clapping, scattered at first, grew louder, bolder, rising from her side of the chamber like a storm. Trump's allies shouted for order, but their voices were drowned out by the sound of hands striking together, the rhythm of justice pounding against the marble walls. Trump's face twisted with rage, his fists clenching tighter with every cheer. This was not the script he wanted. This was not the ambush he had planned. Jasmine leaned into the swell of applause, her voice lifting above it, fierce and unshakable. You can insult me, you can attack me, you can throw every stone you can carry, but I will not break, because my fight is not for me, it is for the truth. And truth, gentlemen, does not bow to bullies. The applause roared louder, echoing through the chamber like thunder rolling through the mountains. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already forming in their minds. Viewers at home sat upright, eyes wide, feeling history shift under their feet. Jasmine stood tall in the storm she had created, her presence commanding the room, her words etching themselves into the moment. Trump slammed his fist against the table again, but the sound was swallowed by clapping. For the first time in the hearing, his voice was not the loudest in the room. The allies he had summoned now sat stiff, their attacks silenced, their power undone by the fire they had tried to ignite. And through it all, Jasmine stood resolute, her smile sharp, her voice steady. The warrior of justice had not just survived their assault, she had turned it into fuel. The hearing had shifted once again. The war was no longer Trump against Jasmine alone. It had become a battle of sides, a clash of worlds. And for the first time, the echoes of justice were louder than the roar of power. But outside those marble walls, another war was raging. Screens across the nation flickered with breaking news banners. Right-wing outlets blasted headlines in all caps. Crockett exposed as fraud. Unhinged Congresswoman attacks president. Anchors with practiced fury spat venom into microphones, painting Jasmine as the villain, the agitator, the chaos bringer. Clips were sliced out of context, spliced into loops designed to humiliate. Her sharpest retorts were framed as shrill outbursts. Her calmest words were twisted into accusations. The propaganda storm spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Commentators screamed that Jasmine Crockett was tearing the country apart. And back in the chamber, Donald Trump smiled. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man whose weapons extended far beyond his own voice. "You hear that, Jasmine?" he sneered. "The whole country is watching you melt down. You're trending, for all the wrong reasons. People know who you really are now. Angry, bitter, dangerous." The words rolled off his tongue like poison-tipped arrows. But they weren't enough. He reached into the arsenal of lies his allies had prepared, pulling out sheets of paper, articles printed from the very outlets feeding the fire. "Here," he said, waving them in the air. "Read it yourself. Reports from journalists, real journalists, not the clowns you hide behind. They say you've been under investigation. They say your so-called evidence is manufactured. They say you're nothing more than a puppet, dancing for radicals who want to destroy America." The chamber gasped as Trump threw the papers down, letting them scatter across the floor like debris after an explosion. He grinned wide, sensing momentum. "Fake news," he mocked. "No, Congresswoman. This is real. This is what America sees when they look at you. A liar, a fraud, a disgrace to this chamber." The noise was deafening. Trump's allies pounding their fists on desks, reporters snapping photos of the scattered pages, chaos swelling like a storm. For the briefest moment, it looked as if the tide had turned back in his favor. But Jasmine Crockett had weathered storms before. She waited, silent, unmoving, as the chamber roared. And when she finally spoke, her voice carved through the chaos like a lightning strike splitting the sky. "Mr. President," she said, her tone calm, deliberate, merciless. "You just proved my point better than I ever could." The noise faltered. Heads turned. Even Trump froze, confusion flickering across his face. Jasmine stepped forward, her words rising in strength. "You stand there waving lies like trophies, parading rumors as if they were truth. You weaponize gossip. You manufacture outrage. You build your empire on deception." Her voice climbed higher, each word burning hotter. "And now, in front of the entire nation, you've crowned yourself with the only title you've ever truly earned." She paused, letting the silence tighten like a drum. Then she delivered the blow. "The president of fake news." The chamber erupted. It wasn't just noise. It was shock. It was electricity. Laughter clashed with cheers, reporters nearly dropping their pens in a rush to record the phrase. Phones lighting up as the words began spreading like wildfire. Trump's face darkened, his jaw clenching, his hand slamming down on the desk. "Disgraceful!" he roared. "A vile insult!" But Jasmine pressed forward, her eyes blazing, her words relentless. "No, Mr. President, not an insult, a mirror. For years you've branded truth as lies and lies as truth. For years you've called yourself the victim while silencing your accusers. Today, the mask has slipped, and the world can see you for what you are." The gavel hammered furiously, but it was drowned beneath the roar of the chamber. Supporters of justice pounded their hands together, voices rising in applause. Even some who had remained silent found themselves nodding, their faces betraying the undeniable weight of her words. Trump shouted again, his voice cracking with fury. But his cries were swallowed by the echo of Jasmine's phrase, repeated, murmured, and shouted across the room. "The president of fake news." Outside, the words had already escaped into the world. Within minutes, hashtags flipped. Memes flooded timelines. What had begun as a smear campaign turned into a boomerang, the label sticking not to Jasmine, but to Trump himself. And as the cameras captured it all, one truth became impossible to ignore. The battlefield of lies had been breached, and Jasmine Crockett had just fired the shot heard around the world. But Trump was a man who thrived in chaos. Cornered, he did what he had always done. He reached for the dirtiest weapon in his arsenal. From beneath the desk, he pulled out a folder stuffed with papers. He slapped it down with a theatrical flourish, his grin stretching wide, his voice sharp as glass. "You think you're clever, Congresswoman? You think you've trapped me?" he sneered. "Well, let's see how clever you sound when the truth shuts your mouth." The chamber stilled, anticipation crackling in the air. Trump opened the folder, pulling out what he claimed were classified memos and financial records. Evidence that painted Jasmine as corrupt, compromised, tied to shadowy figures and questionable deals. He waved them high, each sheet rustling like the wings of a vulture. "Here it is, folks," he shouted, eyes glittering. "Proof that the loudest accuser in this room is nothing but a fraud herself. Jasmine Crockett, exposed." The chamber gasped. Gasps turned into murmurs, murmurs into shouts. Cameras clicked like machine gun fire, capturing the moment as if it were the kill shot. Trump leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Go on, Jasmine. Deny it. Tell us all it's fake. But every time you cry fake, remember, you sound just like me." Laughter erupted from his allies, cruel and vicious, echoing through the chamber like jeers at an execution. Trump pressed harder, sensing blood in the water. "Come on, Congresswoman. Where's that fire now? Where's that sharp tongue? Cat got your tongue, or is it the evidence that finally shut you up?" He slammed the papers onto the desk in front of her, his finger stabbing at the ink like it carried the weight of law. "Read it. Look the American people in the eye and tell them you're not guilty. Prove it if you can." The noise swelled, allies shouting, fists pounding, reporters buzzing like hornets around fresh blood. For the first time in the hearing, Jasmine Crockett said nothing. She stared at the papers. Her hands remained still, her lips pressed tight. Silence. And that silence was deafening. The room turned on her in an instant. Trump's allies laughed louder, their taunts crashing over her like waves. "She's speechless," one jeered. "She's finished," shouted another. Even those who had applauded her earlier shifted uneasily, their confidence wavering under the spectacle. Trump rose to his feet, spreading his arms like a conquering general. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, voice booming with triumph, "the warrior of justice has fallen silent. The so-called defender of truth has no defense. The chamber sees it. The nation sees it. Jasmine Crockett is exposed." His words slammed against the marble walls, feeding the frenzy, the illusion of victory tightening like a noose. The tension inside the chamber reached a fever pitch. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath heavy with expectation. Cameras flashed, capturing Jasmine's stillness, framing it as defeat. She remained silent, still, unmoving. Her silence felt like surrender, like the collapse of a fighter who had carried the battle too long. And Trump reveled in it. He paced the chamber floor, jeering, taunting, hurling insult after insult like stones hurled at a fallen enemy. "Fraud! Hypocrite! Criminal!" His allies joined in, their chants rising into a chorus of mockery, drowning the chamber in noise. The gavel hammered, useless against the uproar. The hearing teetered on the edge of chaos, the air vibrating with tension, the weight of defeat pressing down on Jasmine's shoulders. And still, she said nothing. The silence stretched on, unbearable, a wound that seemed to grow deeper with every second. Trump's grin widened, his chest swelling with pride. He had turned the hearing into his theater, the chamber into his stage, and Jasmine into his foil. Or so he thought. Because beneath that silence, something else stirred. Not surrender, not collapse, but calculation. A silence sharp as a blade, waiting to be unsheathed. The chamber couldn't see it yet. Trump couldn't hear it yet. But those who looked close enough might have noticed the faint curve at the corner of Jasmine's lips. A smile, quiet, dangerous, defiant. The storm was not over. it was only gathering strength. For long, crushing moments, Jasmine Crockett let the chamber believe she was cornered. She let Trump gloat. She let his allies chant. She let the cameras capture her silence. And then she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her own folder. The room quieted, uncertain. Her hands, calm and steady, drew out a single document bound in thick plastic, stamped with seals so official the ink itself seemed to carry the weight of law. She laid it on the desk before her, her eyes never leaving Trump's. "Mr. Trump," she said at last, her voice cutting clean through the uproar, "you've shown us theater. Now let me show you the truth." The chamber froze. The shift in her tone was unmistakable, measured, lethal, like a blade sliding from its sheath. She lifted the document and held it high, every seal gleaming under the harsh lights. "This," she declared, "is the certified record, verified, cross-checked, not a whisper of it forged. Unlike the circus act you just paraded before this nation." Trump stiffened, his grin faltering. But Jasmine didn't give him room to breathe. "You want proof?" she said, her words sharp as gunfire. "Here it is. Your so-called evidence wasn't just fabricated, it was manufactured by one of your own operatives. The same operative who's been caught red-handed falsifying documents before." Gasps cracked through the room. Reporters shot to their feet, pens flying, cameras zooming tighter. Jasmine slapped Trump's papers against her desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This garbage is what you brought to silence me? Forged memos, doctored signatures, counterfeit seals? You didn't just try to lie to me. You tried to lie to the American people." Her voice rose, steady, fierce, unrelenting. "And let me tell you something, Mr. Trump. You can call me names. You can drag my reputation through the mud. But when you forge evidence, when you stand here in front of Congress and peddle fraud, you expose yourself for what you really are, a desperate man terrified of the truth." The chamber erupted, shouts colliding with applause, the gavel hammering for order. Trump lunged forward, face reddening. "Fake news, fake!" "Don't you dare," Jasmine snapped, slicing through his protest like a whip. "Don't you dare hide behind those two words again. You've built an empire on lies, and now you think shouting fake will save you. Not today, not here, not in this chamber." Her words hit like cannon fire. The room, electrified, roared in response. Trump opened his mouth, but nothing came. For once, his voice, his greatest weapon, betrayed him. Jasmine seized the silence. "You've called me corrupt. You've called me weak. You've tried to make me a caricature, a punchline, a distraction from your own crimes. But the truth, Mr. Trump, is that you're the one drowning in your own lies. You're the fraud, you're the coward, and the whole world is watching you choke on the evidence of your own fear." The chamber detonated. Applause thundered, echoing off marble walls, rattling the very foundation of the hall. Reporters shouted over one another, their words a frenzy of astonishment. Trump sat frozen, lips parted, eyes blazing but empty of retort. For the first time in the entire hearing, Donald Trump had no words. Jasmine leaned forward, her gaze unflinching, her voice low but lethal. "You thought my silence was weakness, but it was your rope, and you just hung yourself with it." The eruption was instantaneous. Cheers, applause, the pounding of hands on desks, supporters rising to their feet as if witnessing history unfold. Trump slammed a fist against the table, his voice cracking in frustration. But it was too late. The image was burned, the mighty showman silenced, the weapon of falsehood shattered in his own hands. Jasmine gathered her papers with calm precision, sliding the certified document back into her folder. She didn't need to shout anymore. Her victory had already thundered through every corner of the chamber, through every camera lens broadcasting to millions beyond. And outside those walls, those millions were already writing the headline in their minds. Jasmine Crockett broke Donald Trump. The war was not over, but the tide had turned, and the roar of justice was now louder than the echo of lies. The silence that had stunned Trump moments before shattered like glass. He lurched forward, fists clenched, his face a mask of fury. "You're a disgrace," he bellowed, his voice cracking through the chamber like a thunderclap. "You're not fit to sit here. You're not fit to question me. You're not even fit to—" Bang! Jasmine slammed her palm flat against the desk, the sound reverberating like a cannon. "Don't you dare lecture me about fitness, Mr. Trump," she fired back, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "The only thing you've proven fit for is deception and cowardice." The room jolted. Gasps, shouts, and a sharp crack of the gavel echoed. But no one looked away. Trump roared back, his words tumbling out like bullets. "You think you're tough? You think you can stand here and pretend to be some kind of hero? You're nothing, nothing but a fraud in lipstick." Jasmine leaned forward, eyes blazing, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You call me a fraud?" Says the man who sold this country lies like snake oil at a carnival. "You don't lead, you manipulate. You don't protect, you exploit. And the only thing you build are towers of corruption that collapse the moment truth touches them." The chamber erupted, half in outrage, half in thunderous applause. It was no longer a hearing, it was a coliseum. Trump slammed his fist down, rattling the microphone. "You think you can intimidate me? I've faced tougher than you." Jasmine rose halfway from her seat, her voice steady, venomous. "No, you've never faced someone like me. Because unlike the cronies and cowards who surround you, I don't flinch at your tantrums. I don't kneel before your bluster. I look you in the eye, Mr. Trump, and I see a man terrified of being exposed." The words hit like daggers. Trump's face twisted, his hands gripping the desk as though to stop himself from exploding further. But he couldn't stop. "You're a liar," he spat. "You twist everything I say. You twist everything I've done. You—" "Tell the truth you're too scared to face," Jasmine snapped, cutting him off. "That's what I do. I drag the truth into the light, even when it burns people like you. Especially when it burns people like you." The clash escalated, every exchange sharper, louder, more brutal. Their voices collided like steel on steel, each word a weapon, each rebuttal a strike. "Trump, you're a disgrace to your office." "Jasmine, you turned the highest office in the land into a circus." "Trump, you're weak, just a puppet for your party." "Jasmine, and you're nothing but a puppet of your own ego." The audience leaned forward, breathless. The volley of words was relentless, the energy unbearable, the tension suffocating. The gavel pounded again and again, but it was useless. This was no longer controllable. Trump stood, his voice thundering. "You think the people believe you? You think anyone trusts you? They laugh at you. They see you as a joke." Jasmine shot to her feet, her hands slamming down once more, her voice a feral roar. "No, Mr. Trump. The joke is you. A man who hides behind insults because he cannot stand the weight of facts. A man who calls truth fake and fake truth until he drowns in his own lies. The American people see it, and they are laughing, but not at me, at you." The chamber detonated, applause and outrage clashing in a storm that shook the walls. Cameras flashed, pens scratched furiously, the entire world leaning closer to its screens. For a fleeting instant, Trump froze, caught between rage and silence, his mouth opening and closing without words. Jasmine's eyes locked on his, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You wanted a fight? You've got one. But you've already lost it. Because this isn't about who can shout louder. It's about who can stand when the shouting stops. And we both know, Mr. Trump, that when silence comes, you fall." The chamber exploded once more. Standing ovations from her allies, furious shouts from his defenders, chaos tearing through the air. And in the center of it all, Trump and Jasmine, locked in a war of words so fierce, so raw, that no one in the world could look away. This was no longer politics. This was survival, and only one of them would walk out unbroken. The air in the chamber was electric, heavy, trembling with the aftermath of their verbal war. But now the fault lines that had been rumbling beneath Donald Trump began to split wide open. His allies, those who had risen earlier to jeer and shout, shifted uneasily in their seats. The swagger was gone from their eyes, the certainty drained from their posture, because they knew what millions watching on live television now knew. Jasmine Crockett had the upper hand, and Trump felt it, his face red and swollen with fury, twisted into something almost unrecognizable. His voice, once booming and commanding, cracked as he slammed his fists against the desk. "This is rigged," he shouted, spittle flying across the microphone. "This whole damn hearing is a setup, a witch hunt, The gavel pounded. "Order! Order!" the chair barked. But Trump didn't stop. He couldn't. "You're all traitors," he screamed, finger jabbing wildly around the chamber. "You sit there pretending to be fair, pretending to be righteous, but you're all scum, every single one of you," gasps, murmurs. A senator who had once cheered him on leaned back, shaking his head. Another avoided his gaze entirely, eyes glued to the desk. The tide wasn't just turning, it was abandoning him altogether. Jasmine, still standing, folded her arms across her chest. Her expression was calm, almost amused, and when she spoke, her words sliced through his tantrum like a scalpel through rotting flesh. "You hear that?" she asked, her voice steady, loud enough to echo. "That's not strength. That's desperation. That's what happens when a man who built his empire on fear suddenly realizes fear won't save him anymore." The chamber crackled. Trump whipped toward her, his face contorted. "Shut your mouth," he bellowed. "You're nothing but a—" Jasmine raised a hand, stopping him cold. Her eyes locked on his, blazing with controlled fire. "Careful, Mr. Trump," she said, each syllable deliberate, lethal. "You've thrown every insult, every slur, every curse you can conjure. And look where it's gotten you. Alone, cornered, abandoned by even the people who once clapped for your lies." A ripple ran through the room. It was true. His allies, once loud, were silent. The cameras caught it. The world saw it. Trump tried again, but his words tumbled out incoherent, more bark than argument. "Fake news, lying witch, corrupt, you're—" Jasmine tilted her head, her voice calm and cutting. "You can't even finish your sentence anymore. You see, Mr. Trump, power doesn't leave quietly. It goes out thrashing, screaming, clawing at anything it can reach. That's what we're watching right now. Not leadership, not strength, just the last desperate gasps of a man who knows he's finished." The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from her allies, shouts and whistles rising in waves. Even a few of Trump's former defenders couldn't resist the pull of her words, clapping timidly, then stronger, as if breaking free from a spell. Trump slammed both fists on the table, his voice breaking into a roar. "This is bullshit. This is all bullshit." The profanity echoed off marble, hung in the air like smoke. The cameras drank it in. The audience watching at home gasped. The President of the United States, reduced to rage and vulgarity, live on the nation's screens. Jasmine let the silence linger, let his words poison the air around him. Then she delivered the blow that sealed it. "You call this bullshit?" she said, her voice steady, sharp. "No, Mr. Trump. This is accountability, and for the first time in your life, it's staring you in the face." She leaned forward, her eyes unblinking, her tone rising like a hammer pulled back. "You can scream, you can curse, you can break down right here in front of us, but it won't change the truth. It won't erase the evidence, and it won't silence me, or the millions who now see you for exactly what you are." The chamber exploded once more, louder than ever. Applause shook the walls, the gavel slamming helplessly against the desk in a futile attempt to restore order. But the order was gone. Trump sat slumped, red-faced, trembling, muttering curses into the microphone that no longer carried weight. He was unraveling in real time, and Jasmine stood tall, shoulders squared, every word she had spoken still hanging in the air like thunder. The empire of lies had cracked. The fortress of fear was collapsing, and the world was watching Donald Trump crumble. The gavel fell one final time. The sound was hollow, almost drowned out by the clamor that still rattled the chamber. "Order!" the chair announced, voice strained. "This hearing is adjourned." But order was a fiction now. The air crackled with everything that had just unfolded. Trump slumped back in his chair, lips still moving, muttering curses too low for the microphone to catch. His face was pale beneath the flush of rage, his suit disheveled, his composure shattered beyond repair. Around him, the allies who once cheered him on avoided his gaze. A few gathered their papers quickly, fleeing the scene as though his downfall might stain them too. The cameras caught every glance, every flinch, every silent betrayal. Jasmine, meanwhile, stood tall, her back straight, her eyes unwavering. She radiated the steady defiance that had carried her through the storm. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to, because the victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the truth she had hurled like a weapon, to the millions outside these walls who had seen a man once untouchable finally stumble. The hearing chamber emptied in waves, but the roar outside only grew louder. Crowds pressed against barriers, shouting her name, holding signs, raising fists. Some wept, others cheered. All of them knew they had witnessed history. News anchors scrambled for words, their voices urgent, frantic. The president unraveled on live television. Jasmine Crockett takes center stage as a voice of unflinching justice. The day Congress became a battlefield. Clips replayed instantly. Trump's fists slamming the desk, his curses echoing, his silence when Jasmine struck him speechless. Hashtags flooded the digital world, her name trending in every corner, his collapse dissected frame by frame. And through it all, Jasmine moved with calm precision, leaving the chamber like a soldier walking off the battlefield. Reporters swarmed her, questions flying like arrows, but she gave only one line before disappearing into the sea of flashing cameras. "I didn't come here to win a fight," she said. "I came here to speak the truth, and the truth has a way of winning on its own." Those words replayed on loop, replayed until they became something larger than a quote, until they became a rallying cry. By evening, the nation was split not by silence, but by noise. Some clung desperately to Trump's unraveling figure, calling it a conspiracy, a setup. But even in those corners, doubt festered. And for millions more, the image was unshakable. Jasmine Crockett, unbroken, staring down a man who had once ruled with bluster and fear. She was no longer just a representative. She was a symbol, a warrior who hadn't just debated. She had fought, and in fighting, had exposed something raw and undeniable. Trump, meanwhile, retreated behind closed doors. No statements, no rallies. His empire of noise had gone eerily quiet. For a man who lived on attention, silence was its own defeat. But Jasmine's words lingered, carried across airwaves, whispered in households, chanted in streets. She had not merely clashed with a president. She had pulled the curtain back on power itself. And yet, beneath the celebration, beneath the catharsis, there was something else. A sense that this wasn't the end. That the crumbling of one fortress was only the beginning of a greater storm. Jasmine felt it too, as she stood by the window that night, the noise of crowds still rising from below. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but fierce, knowing the truth that no headline could capture. The war for justice had not been won. It had only been declared. She turned from the window, her voice a whisper meant for no one but herself. The battle may be over, but the war is just beginning. And with that, the chapter closed. Not with silence, but with the echo of something larger. A promise, a warning, a beginning. In the end, this was never just about one man's fall or one woman's rise. It was about the truth, fragile yet unyielding, standing its ground against the weight of power and deceit. The lesson is simple but eternal. When lies grow loud, let courage be louder. Each voice, no matter how small, carries the power to pierce through darkness. And in choosing truth, in daring to stand tall, we do not just defend justice, we become it. ChatGPT said, "If this clash lit a fire in you, don't just move on. Sit with it, share it. Let it echo beyond this screen. Like, comment, and pass it to someone who still believes truth should never bow to arrogance." Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where silence is broken and power is held to account. Hit the bell, because the fight for justice doesn't pause. It sharpens, it cuts deeper, and it might just change how you see those who claim control. This story is a fictional dramatization, drawn from real struggles and real defiance. Any likeness to people or events is coincidental or symbolic for reflection and critique. Thank you for watching. Justice isn't a gift, it's a battle. This is Harrison Stories.